Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Spark Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and today I'm going to be talking with Ryan Weber, Director of Business and Tech Writing and the UX program here at UAH, as well as a mentor at the I2C. In this episode, we talked about the importance of a user-centric perspective, as well as about the details of his upcoming project, the View Lab. Let's roll. Hey Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you, Jack?
I'm doing fantastic. I was just going to see if you would mind just going ahead and introducing yourself to our viewers. You can tell them a little bit about yourself, what you do, your areas of specialty, or your professional interests.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Ryan Weber. I am the Director of Business and Tech Writing here at UAH, and also the Director of UX programs, User Experience programs, and an Associate Professor in the English department. So I teach technical writing, proposal writing, that kind of thing. And I'm really interested in entrepreneurship and have been for a while, kind of especially the things that entrepreneurs write in order to start and maintain their businesses. And then also more recently, kind of how they involve users, especially in product ideation and innovation, coming up with product ideas that meet users' needs by engaging users themselves. So those are some of my interests, in addition to things like, the rhetoric of NASA and that kind of thing, science writing and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And Dr. Weber is actually one of the professors that I've had for a couple of semesters since I'm in tech writing. And he's been fantastic. One of my favorite professors here.
Well, thank you. You have to say that because I'm on the show right now.
No.
You say that to all your guests.
No, seriously. I've really enjoyed, especially that technical communications class. Like, that really taught me a lot of skills that I've put to use for this job. And
Great.
Just like, I don't know, it really was a class that I think had a big impact on where I wanted to go with like my own personal career. So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. That's great news. Yeah.
And so as one of the mentors here at I2C and just as a communicator, how critical do you think it is that entrepreneurs develop the ability to communicate with those outside of their area of expertise?
Well, I think it's huge because you have to explain and sell people on your product, right? And explain how to use it and explain why it's valuable. So, a lot of entrepreneurs, especially people who are, innovating new technologies, applying for patents, that kind of thing, they probably have a pretty specialized knowledge of whatever it is they're working on, their software, their biotech, whatever it is. And sometimes you can kind of get lost in the weeds, right? Because I know what this is. I know every, line of code or every little feature that it has. But then you've got to be able to convince people, first of all, that they need it, right? That it meets their needs, that they should care about it. And that involves sometimes kind of taking a higher level view. Because a lot of entrepreneurs are often, or designers, product designers are often interested in how something works. And users are interested in how they can use it and what they can do with it. And those are two very different things, right? Because, I use Microsoft Word every day. I don't know how it works. I don't know what the code is. I don't care. Tell me. I don't want to know. I want to know how I can achieve my goals with it or whatever it is, whatever technology you're using. And so really being able to convey that information, how does this make people's lives better? Why would they want to use it? How does it connect with their goal or the user's identity or social networks or needs or whatever it is?
Yeah. Would you say that that's dependent upon the kind of specific field that you're in, or is that really something that's a must for everyone in every field?
I think it's a must. Of course, it depends on who your users are. If you created, if you're Mark Zuckerberg and you created Facebook and, 1 point something billion people use it, you have to have a very broad appeal for what this thing is. If you created, a specialized tool for surgeons, right, then you have to be able to communicate with those people who may have some more of your expert knowledge right along the way. It just kind of depends on who your users are, right? Who's going to be using this thing. And often I think what people learn is that users are surprising, right? And they are smart and they have a lot of knowledge of their own, and they may even come up with sort of additional uses or additional applications for your product that you may not have even thought of.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So again, so I mentioned Facebook, and if the movie is correct, Zuckerberg made that to rank the attractiveness of women at Harvard, and didn't think that it was going, which is a terrible use for a product. But he didn't expect 1.3 billion people or whatever it is to be using it around the world to either foster communication during a revolution, or spread misinformation about vaccines, or share pictures of their dog with their grandma, and all those things are being used. Facebook's being used for all of those things. And so sort of none of that was, I think, in the original use case scenarios when they pitched it to investors.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that you were talking about is how users are able to really be a part of the ideation process. And so I know that one of your big projects here at UAH right now is the View Lab. And if I understand correctly, that's really what that's all about. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So it's probably going to get its name changed to the View Lab, the Virtual and User Experience Lab. Right now it's the Evaluation and User Experience Lab. But that's what it's about. It's all about kind of figuring out if your technology meets users' needs and if they can use it, right? So there's if you're talking about user-centered design, which is what I'm talking about here, really making stuff for people to use, for human beings to use, instead of, well, I want to do this because I think it's cool, or this technology is really neat. If you're making stuff that people really want to use, you've got to know, one, does it do stuff they want? That's useful. And then two, is it usable, right? Can they use it easily? And you've got to meet both those criteria. And so the View Lab, we have software and technology and tools in there that can help you on all sorts of different parts of that journey. So, we have eye tracking devices where you can see kind of where are people looking when they're looking at your screen or your device or whatever. And we have software that can kind of track clicks and that kind of thing. So if you wanted to see if people can navigate through your system and use it easily without making mistakes or getting lost. But you can also do observations. We've got a one-way mirror, which is pretty neat. It's all brand new. In fact, I haven't been in there yet because of the pandemic. No. I haven't gotten to see it, but it's a new space. And that's what it's all about, is really testing your products with users to make sure they can use it, they like it, they're not frustrated with it. What emotions do they have when they're experiencing this thing? I haven't used it. I know you're talking to Candace Laney later this week. We have like EEG caps, which can measure like brain waves, and they just got a new HoloLens, which does like AR stuff. So there's a lot of fun tools in there. And the whole goal of the lab is, do people like to use your thing? Can they use it easily? Does it meet their needs?
Wow, that's really fascinating. And then one thing that I think is actually particularly interesting about that is how many different products there are in there that you are actually using in use cases that may not have been the original use case. Like the one that really stood out to me was the eye tracking software. I've heard a lot of different use cases for that. One is that I believe you can use eye tracking software as a accessibility option in like actually maneuvering a lot of different software for people who, maybe, lack certain motor functions in their hands and, can't use a mouse, or it might be a video game controller or something like that. But also, the like the EEG caps, like that's something that was presumably almost more for I would assume that it's would be what, a medical use
like
case
a medical
initially?
Either a medical use case or sort of a neuroscience use case. And it's sort of with the explosion of neuroscience research, kind of people are interested in what's happening in your brain when you do this or that. And the EEG caps are nice because to really get good data on that, you've got to shove someone in an fMRI machine, which gives you good data. But then, like, what can you do in an fMRI machine? You can't, give a speech or run around or do any, So it's nice to have something that's portable that can kind of get people's, some of their mental working while they're in action doing stuff.
I'm imagining, just like somebody who, for instance, there's a lot of psychology that goes into like game design these days. And so, maybe somebody's trying to create a satisfying feedback loop in their game, and they can like an app, and they're wanting to use that to measure, is the brain giving a positive response to, this sound effect? Can we use that as almost a conditioning thing?
To figure out, is this interface, is it stressful, like these particular, the sound effect, this graphic, what kinds of responses are people having to it? And
so how can entrepreneurs with the I2C make use of this research base to better help reach their target market?
Sure. Well, we have a lot of options for people to use this stuff. We're still kind of working out, what kind of the price range and everything would be for using the services and everything. But our goal is to really have, a nicely staffed lab with a lot of grad interns in there who can kind of help you use this stuff, teach you how to use the equipment, maybe even run some experiments with you so that you can see kind of how people like using your products, what refinements you can make, so you can get some sort of real user feedback on what you're doing to really make it something that people are going to love to use.
And then, honestly, just as a question out of personal curiosity, how can businesses kind of go about getting users that are, going to be, available to go through this testing to help them do their research?
That's a great question. I mean, again, it depends on who your users are, right? Because if you are, marketing something to, an app for college students, well, we've got you covered, right? If you want to test your thing with surgeons, we're going to have to figure out some recruitment strategies. And of course, there's also, in Huntsville, there's a lot of military. And so I know there's a lot of, individuals around, but it kind of depends case by case, who am I looking for? What kind of users am I dealing with? Because you want to try to find, ideally, you want to find somebody who's sort of as close to your imagined or, researched user as you can.
Yeah. How particular of a case is the View Lab to Huntsville? Is that a type of thing that's popping up across the country?
Yeah, it is. There are a lot of these labs and universities across the country. Auburn has one that's pretty well respected. Clemson has a really respected one. And so there are a lot of these across the country. I think the nice thing about having in a university is you can do sort of the dual academic research, so we conduct academic research in there, and then also have businesses or, local organizations who have access to be able to rent the space and use the equipment as well. So it's a nice way to kind of make it a little bit more, I think, cost effective for one, and also just sort of get more purpose out of it.
I'm sure that's good for the students too, because then it almost becomes an opportunity for them to network. If you've got 10 businesses coming in a day to come in and do their research, and you make yourself invaluable to that business and show them that, you're a hard worker, then that's something that could go a long way. I'm sure when, you finally complete, that degree and you're looking to, the different connections that you have, testing the water, seeing, where am I needed?
Right. No, that's exactly right. And I hope that that's the kind of thing that happens because, like I said, we've got now a graduate certificate in user experience and then also a user experience minor. And so we're getting more and more students, and I really want to give these students hands-on experience, conducting these kinds of research, conducting this kind of research. And so I think this is a really good chance for them to kind of get their hands dirty, play around with some of the tools, figure out how to use them, figure out what businesses want to know. Because user experience is also becoming more popular in Huntsville, those jobs and those departments within companies, Hexagon and Northrop and AdTran, a lot of these big companies are leaning more and more on user experience, as is the government.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. My brother actually works at Hexagon. He worked there for, I think it's coming up on 9 years now. In UX.
Oh, great.
And, something that I find is really fascinating about that is just how UX is something that people, I think, typically consider to be exclusively a part of software. Like for the layman, it's usually like, oh yeah, that's got to do with, what buttons do I press and this, are the buttons easy to find?
Yes. Yep.
But from an interview that I did with my brother for your class, actually, something he kind of opened my eyes to was that it's much broader than that. Something he really talked about was just that at the end of the day, it's mostly about being able to identify kind of points of friction between the user and their goals.
Right.
And then, devising ways to eliminate that from the picture. And so is that something that you can also do using the View Lab? Is that something that, is it really more for ideation, or is it, something that a company can come back to time and again throughout.
It is something
whole
that you could
development
come back
process.
to time and again because, UX is an iterative process. That means you kind of, design, test,
Yeah.
so that you're kind of refining your product over time. And so, yeah, it is something you can use throughout sort of the lifespan of product development. It is good too. The View Lab is great. The other thing you probably want to do though is get out and see your users in their environment. And that is especially true for, these non-software products, right?
Yeah.
Because, and that's an important point, UX is not just for software, it's for any product or service that you're using. Do people like using it? Does it meet their needs? And a lot of times, sometimes people are using products, they're sitting at a desk, but sometimes it's an app and you're out. I have an app that identifies plants. You're not using that at your desk. You're using that in the woods, or it's, you're using it where it's rainy, or you're using it, I always talk about instructions for changing oil in a car, like you're under the car, the instructions could get dirty, or you've got instructions that have to meet that context of use. Or if you're thinking about soldiers using things, right, they're going to be, they might be at a desk or they might be in the field getting shot at and have to use your product at the same time, so it's a very different context of use than if you're just sort of like sitting there calmly and getting things done.
An example that kind of comes to mind immediately for me is the biometric recognition on like phones these days, and how, in a controlled environment, the fingerprint scanner that I use to unlock my phone is going to work 100% of the time, or 99.99% of the time. But my actual use cases for that are pretty varied. It's like if I eat and then I wash my hands, then that little bit of water residue is potentially enough to cause it to not recognize it.
Sure, right. Or if you're somewhere where your hands are getting dirty, right? Or so that's exactly what I'm talking about, is really testing stuff and as close to the context of use as possible.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. Just, I think that it's pretty important for that. I had a podcast last month where what we talked about was how, just as a developer, your mindset really can be so different from the mindset that a user has going into something, and how it's really a pitfall that, you can get so caught up kind of in your own idea that if you don't go through that research process, then what you'll end up with is you'll realize that you were way off, and what the user actually wants from it is something totally different.
Right. Yeah, you designed either for yourself or for an imaginary user, and occasionally there are visionary people who that works for them. Yeah. But for most products, you really want to make sure you're designing for the actual person who's going to use it, and those people can sometimes get forgotten.
Yeah. And so I think it's great that there is that controlled environment, because even if there are certain things that may kind of not be immediately obvious in that environment, like the wet hand example, then at the very least it gives you an unbelievably strong starting point. Right. For getting the foundations of the product down, and then you can start to think about those kind of stringent cases where it's not an ideal situation.
Yeah, at least you can get all the other problems out of the way, so you can deal with the wet hands problem. With the phone. Yeah.
And so then finally, kind of just as a UX specialist, what are a couple of things that companies and entrepreneurs need to keep in mind when they're designing their products or services?
Yeah, so a couple things, just real broad speaking. Again, user goals are paramount. Like that's what people use your product to fulfill some kind of other goal. Very rarely is people's go like, I'm going to use Excel today. I'm waking up and that's what I want to do, right? Nobody is like, that's my goal. It's, well, I've got to get these spreadsheets done, or I've got to keep track of the games that I've been playing, or whatever it is. And so you've got to figure out kind of what goal does my product meet for users. You said that earlier when you talked to your brother, getting rid of the friction between the user and their goal, right? And the product is almost always, not always, but almost always kind of a means to the end for the user. And then really thinking about the emotions of the people, you know, and kind of either ideally your product makes people happy when they use it, right? And that's some products are designed that way. I'm sure, you know, playing Angry Birds or whatever, you put the EEG cap on people. I don't know what the popular mobile game is. So it's kind of a dated reference these days. I'm old. But, you know, hopefully it elicits some kind of positive emotion, but at the very least it kind of minimizes the negative emotions. So if, you know, no one wants to, say, do their taxes, but hopefully your tax software at least accounts for the fact that people don't want to do their taxes and minimizes those negative emotions that they're having.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like, you know, another example is like everybody hates driving to some extent. You know, I mean, psychologists have tested like the, you know, amount of stress from driving is something that over your lifespan just kind of chops off years at the end of it.
That's a depressing thought, that the years you're wasting driving are taking additional years off your life beyond that. Yeah.
Yeah. But, and, you know, it's like, I guess that's kind of the whole selling point behind something like self-driving cars is that it's taking this point of friction that's like, you know, well, I'd like to get out and do this thing, but then I'm going to have to drive all the way there.
Right.
And, you know, traffic might be terrible. And that's just going to be such a stressful situation.
Right.
So I may as well just stay in. Which, you know, for the past year has been a good thing.
Sure,
I
yeah.
guess. But, you know, it's something that takes that and, aside from the time investment, eliminates it almost completely. And that's something that, I mean, that's why, you know, Tesla has blown up in a way that, you know, there haven't really been new car companies for years.
Right.
And so that's why that's able to be a technology that breaks through into the market when, you know, no one else really has for so long. Is just because, you know, identifying that right pain point and then saying, here's our way to resolve it that, you know, maybe people had thought of in the past but didn't really think it was a possibility.
So but that's one example of, you got this pain point of, man, I've been sitting in traffic for an hour, wasting my time, you know, and that's also why podcasts have gotten, so speaking of, you know, podcasts, they were kind of on their way out. And then when you could start listening to them through your cars, like the market blew up again because people have all this time on their hands with nothing to do with it. So I was like, well, I might as well put on this podcast.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I was talking with somebody else about this recently, about how podcasts are an interesting user group because rarely do people are like, I'm going to sit down by the fire and listen to a podcast. You know, it's always, I'm cooking, I'm put a podcast on, I'm running, I'm put a podcast on, I'm driving, I'll put a podcast on.
Yeah.
And so it's a different use case than reading a book, right? Because it's almost like, there are great podcasts out there, but it's almost like I'm killing time. Like it's not my, it's something to do while I'm doing something else. So it meets that particular need of like, I don't want to feel like I'm wasting time. I don't want to stare at these cars in front of me.
Yeah.
And then with self-driving, you know, you could read a book in the car. You could, you know, look at your phone in the car. You could maybe not take a nap, but maybe, I don't know. We'll see how it pans out.
Yeah. And then even then, you know, that kind of breakthrough there is something that I think later paved the way for like audiobooks, even though audiobooks have been around for years and years, and Audible had been around for years before it started to become something that was really, really widely used. Now it's huge. I mean, you can barely go and watch a YouTube video without hearing about it.
Some sort of Audible commercial. Well, and that's it. They got a new use case, right? You were able to sit in your car and listen to it through your phone, you know? So, because it used to be an audiobook, you had to listen on like a Walkman or a, you know, CD, one of the portable CD players, Discman, and dating myself again, because that was the coolest thing when I was in high school. But yeah, now you've got one technology, the phone, that makes these other technologies possible.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming in today and, you know, sitting down for this podcast. I think it's been a really interesting conversation. I think that it's very, very important for people to adopt more of a user-centric viewpoint because, you know, as developers, it really is so easy to kind of get tunnel visioned
Mm-hmm.
on, here's the problem I've identified, here's how I can fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's also great that, now there's a way for more people to hear about the View Lab. Hopefully people will be able to come by and make use of that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're planning on having a sort of a grand opening as soon as, things are sort of back to normal again. So look for news about that.
Mm-hmm. And then where is the View Lab located?
It's located in the basement of Morton Hall, which is the recently renovated Morton Hall here on the UAH campus.
Yeah. I bet a lot of people didn't even realize that it was being renovated. I think that started after did that start after?
It was kind of right in the middle of the pandemic was when it started. So it's really nice. It's, go check it out if you haven't been over there. It's brand new. They kept some of the old, classic face of the Morton Hall.
Wow.
And then expanded out. So it's really nice.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Jack. It was fun. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Thanks again, Ryan, for coming on the podcast today. We're really excited to have him here at the I2C as a mentor and to see how the companies here at the I2C will be able to make use of the View Lab. I hope that you've all enjoyed listening today and that you'll be on the lookout for the next guest on the Spark Spotlight podcast. In the meantime, be sure to follow us on all of our socials at UAH I2C on Instagram and Twitter and UAH Invention to Innovation Center on Facebook. Onward and upward.